Number 1. This happened when I was 13. I'm a girl in the 8th grade, and the middle school I went to was about a 15-minute walk, so it wasn't very far. For context, my older brother and I grew up in East LA in a small house that had a metal gate, and both the front and back doors had a black metal screen door and a wooden door. During the day, we would always leave the wooden door open and have the black metal door closed and locked. Except this day. This day, I came home from school and had about an hour before anyone else would be home. I was really thirsty, so I rushed inside, grabbed a drink, and sat down at the kitchen table, which is about 10 feet away from the front door. I heard the metal gate open up and was surprised as no one should have been coming home that early. I got up to see who it was, and I saw an older man, probably in his 60s. He had short white hair and a long white beard. He was wearing an AC/DC t-shirt, torn jeans, and sunglasses. I remember thinking he looked a lot like Santa Claus, but dirty and creepy. He knocked on the metal screen door and asked if my parents were home. I was a dumb kid and said they weren't. He got this smile on his face and said that he collected donations for needy children. I said sorry, but I didn't have any money. He said sometimes children donated old toys. I said I didn't have any old toys to donate. He insisted that I must have some toys I didn't want anymore. He was beginning to creep me out, and I noticed I hadn't locked the door when I came inside. I tried to keep my cool as I slowly and very carefully locked the door. I kept him talking so he wouldn't notice. A minute or two later, he wouldn't leave, so I decided I would pretend to check for toys, and then say I didn't have any so he would hopefully leave. I told him I would go check, and as I turned and took a few steps down the hall, I clearly heard him yank at the door trying to open it. I didn't want him to know I had heard, so I kept walking down the hall and into a room. I didn't have a cell phone, and the only phone in the house was in the kitchen. I thought about what to do and decided to stick with my plan. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I walked out hoping he had left. Nope, creepy Santa Man was still there. I told him sorry, but I didn't find anything. He sighed and said alright, and he would check another time. He left and walked across the street. I watched from the kitchen window, peeking through the blinds as he just stood there, staring at my house for about 45 minutes. My brother and a few of his friends finally came walking down the street. As my brother came inside and his friends kept walking down the street, the man walked around the corner and disappeared. I told my brother what happened and he walked outside to look, but creepy Santa Man was long gone. When my mom came home, we told her what had happened, and she called the police, but they said to call back if he showed up again. Thankfully, he never did show up again. So, creepy Santa Man, let's not meet. Number 2. First off, I live in a small, very rural village with maybe 10 to 15 houses. It's maybe 5 minutes from the highway and about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it takes you about 10 minutes to walk to the forest. Christmas afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food we ate. It was about 1700 hours or 5 o'clock p.m. and already dark when we left, and we had quite a large LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and flash as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then take a right, following a small graveled cycle track close to the forest border, which connects our village to the next with a 15 to 20 minute walk between villages. In the middle part of the track, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive there and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside the car and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parked there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner spoke up. There's someone standing behind us in the middle of the road. He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time, close to the border of the forest, there were boars that would appear, and since it's mating season, they are more aggressive than usual. I look and indeed there was a man standing behind us, staying out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first I thought he might have been startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking photos around your car, even though it was not legal to drive on that path with the car. I decided to get up and confront him from a distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that this wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just get the fuck out and followed the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and I googled it. It turns out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is in a very strict lockdown right now, so you are only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off, but he didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then. But I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. It was a big regret that I didn't remember the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't even think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows and that he could possibly have walked behind us. Plus, him having no light and not responding. He did seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take the photos, though. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if I was alone. Edit. When I told my housemate, she theorized that he may have been spying on the houses very close to the forest border, as you can easily look into their backyards without being seen, since all you have to do is walk up a bit of the hill and further. I think it's likely. I had the thought of photographing a car when I entered the forest part of the path, but somehow I felt unwell about it and decided to not do it, despite it being an interesting scene. In hindsight, I believe this saved me, as he must have hidden behind the trees close to the car and forest entrance. If he was really planning a burglary or, worse, dumping a body, I think it's likely he may have attacked me if he realized I had a potential photo of his car with a recognizable license plate. We went back and found a tape marking on one of the trees, a very small hideout used more to store things than to sit in, as well as some cut off part of a backpack. So, creepy guy sneaking around in the forest? Let's not meet. Number 3. I've been thinking about this interaction a lot. It's not particularly novel. Other women have probably experienced worse. But this is the one that sticks with me for some reason. Hopefully writing about it will help me get over it. About 4 years ago, in my younger and literally more naive 20s, I worked as a tutor for a small business in the newly developing area of the town where I had grown up in. Needless to say, I felt safe and I knew some of the customers coming in as the kid brothers and sisters to friends I had in high school. Colleagues were all amazing, and truly this was the first job where I felt like family business meant family in every sense of the word. Everyone was just treated so well and taken care of. Because this was a newly developing area, it also meant that we were quite far away from the suburbs and even other main points of the city. Eventually it would all connect according to City Hall, but for now it was just an expanse of dark hills and clusters of light, where businesses were being put up one by one. In our own little block we had a pizzeria, a sushi restaurant, and a sandwich shop. That was it for miles, unless you wanted to cross the road to visit the grocery store deli. Then darkness for more miles until you hit the first tract of farms that buffered between the suburb city and our own spot in the hills. Needless to say, this meant two things. One, you either brought your own lunch or you would be stuck in an endless loop of pizza and sandwich shop options forever. And two, walking driving at night was always scary, doubly so if you're a semi-disabled female like myself. Anyway, it became a habit for one of us to order dinner for the whole office one night a week when we had to stay past our last tutoring appointment, usually at 8 p.m., to complete an office meeting or else put in some overtime on paperwork and progress reports for the kids. Usually it was customary to call either the sandwich shop or the pizzeria and then just send one or two people over to pick up the order, as there were about 15 to 20 employees at the tutoring place any given point, so it would be a lot for one person to carry alone. However, the night in question when this story takes place involved only 3 late-night workers, as everyone else had to bow out for health or family emergency-related reasons. That meant it was just myself, my now boyfriend, and our co-worker, who would be the only ones to complete overtime, all of us in our earlier mid-20s and no one from management. 3 people meant the order would be easy enough for one person to carry, and it was my turn to go. Having sat down at a desk all day and being faced with a couple hours of more sitting, I decided it would be better for me to walk down to the end of the block to order and pick up the sandwiches. Besides, I liked the sandwich shop workers, and I thought I could shoot the breeze with them. It was at that time that I saw my last client of the day standing in line with his family at the counter. Kids are always such cute spazzes whenever they see their instructors or tutors outside the educational context. It literally blows their minds that we exist outside of the classroom, and Micah was no different at that age. He kept tugging at his mom's skirt and whispering, "It's Miss Lady from the tutoring place. Look, Mom, can I talk to her?" Until finally his mom glanced over at me and just gave me that, "Sorry, I know you're off the clock and you literally just saw him, but..." look, to which I just waved Mike over, while his mom completed the order of their 3 sandwiches. She had her newborn with her, so I knew she could use the respite. Micah proceeded to tell me, and the whole sandwich shop, all about his new science project, which was due next week, and it was a nice little break for a while. Standing quite closely to Micah was a man I assumed to be his father. There was a likeness in their features, and he looked down strangely at me as Micah began talking, almost like the man was trying to figure out who I was exactly. It's the look I get frequently from the fathers of the children I tutored at that time. Let's be honest, moms bear the brunt of the second shift at home. This guy looked like he worked one of those jobs, business-like, clearly fancy financial or legal work from the look of his watch, briefcase, suits, and he probably put in a lot of overtime if he would only be joining them for dinner and then heading back to the office. I don't know what made me think that, based on that brief interaction, but it was the feeling I got. Although, I guess it was because he was standing protectively over Micah and yet distantly at the same time. He never looked at his wife or asked her who I was. That should have tipped me off that something was off. "Aren't you being real chatty today?" the man said, and Micah looked up at him and beamed a big smile. "Is this your teacher?" "Kinda," Micah replied sheepishly before skirting back to his mom, who was about to reach the cashier. The man turned his full attention on me, eyes like an eagle. I could tell he was already trying to size me up and making a mental catalog of everything. Tall, average build, raccoon-eyed woman, is what he saw that night. My disability is invisible unless I need my cane for the day, or worse, the wheelchair on a really bad day, and I didn't need either implements that day. "I'm Robert," he said and extended his hand for me to shake. I took it without thinking twice. The grip was weird, overly aggressive. Definitely a businessman, I told myself. And I gripped back as hard as I could, hoping that it would get him to back off. He eventually did let go. The cashier, Marta, glanced over then at me and froze in place, her face inscrutably blank, her hands pausing midair as she handed the cash back to the person ahead of Micah's family. A different worker came up to take my order, and between ordering my food and talking to Robert, I didn't look back at Marta for a while, and I honestly didn't think twice about her reaction. From then, I don't remember the particulars of what started the conversation or how it got to where it did, but I was only extra chatty about my life and stuff because I thought he knew most of what I was telling him, either through Micah or his mom. He told me all about his first business venture in music, that he had his own small recording studio and company for indie bands still as a side business, that he hoped his kids would take over it one day or at least work in music as a legacy. What about work, though? I honestly thought he meant my job as one of Micah's tutors. I thought he meant what about securing a better paying job with my current degree. If you can't tell by now, I was a pretty naive 20-something. "Oh, doing tutoring for now until I can get my grad degree completed, then who knows? Although, since the accident, I have to really think twice about what kind of job I'll need in the long run to keep the injury from worsening over time." Up until now, everything had been normal. He'd kept pace with Micah and Mom in the line as we'd move along with it. Now, sharpened in his gaze. This really made him perk up. "You're injured?" "Yeah, might need back surgery sometime in the future. For now I'm doing pretty good with just therapy, though." "So you can't run or, walk fast?" What an odd thing to ask. I paused. "What?" "You said you had a back injury. Is there anything else you can't do? It must be difficult for your boyfriend." That was wildly inappropriate. I felt shocked to the core. How old did you say you were? 23 in October? Hmm, you look good for 23. You look like you could be younger than 18. Do you sing? You never did say. That last remark did it for me. This was behavior that was disgusting in any context, but which I understood better from randos on the street, not from the fathers of my tutoring kids. I felt like someone had slapped me across the face. Micah's dad or not, this was not happening. At that point, I turned to complain to Micah's mom, and that's when I saw them leaving. The bell above the door tinkled. Micah and his mom were walking out, their sandwich bag in tow. Micah, sweet boy that he was, shouted out, "Bye, Miss Lady! Bye, Miss Lady, friend!" The sudden realization that I had divulged personal information, workplace, grad school location, and thanking him for the lovely gift cards to my favorite shops that I'd received from Micah to a complete stranger hit me then. He'd had ample opportunity to correct me on the nature of his relationship to Micah. He now knew Micah's name and all about his science project, which admittedly he'd divulged himself to the whole shop, but also Micah's school. Dread pulled at the pit of my stomach, and then fear took over. There were only 3 of us, and I had to lock up that night. In about 2 hours' time, I'd be alone to do clean-up and lock-up duties. Robert laughed and waved back, then turned back to me with what I can only describe as a dead serious look, humorless look on his face. "You were saying?" Marta came over at that point and swapped places with the sandwich artist. She told him something along the lines of, "Fuck off, Robert," beneath her breath, which shocked me. Marta was incredibly sweet and kind, and the thought of her cursing was about the last thing I thought she would ever do from what I'd known of her. "Sure, Marta. See you around, honey bunny." But he didn't leave. He simply got into his car, which was parked in the front of the sandwich shop. And he sat there, watching us as Marta packed up my order and helped me call the tutoring place for an escort back. She told me about Robert then, a real first-grade creep who liked to come in and tease her. That's what management called it, and if she didn't need the money so badly, she would have left months ago. But she was getting close to reestablishing a savings, and she needed at least 2 more pay periods before she could go. I later found out that she didn't wait for the second pay period. Marta left only 2 weeks later, and it was sudden, but the manager insists she left in broad daylight and got into a friend's car halfway through the shift, so I guess Robert didn't get to her. At least, not that I know of. And yeah, I asked. Of course I asked. Even after my colleagues came for me, Robert watched from the car. I hooked my arm through my colleague's arm. Marta hadn't explained anything to him, just that I needed help, and I'm sure I surprised him with that small action. He didn't ask, though. Once we got back, my colleague kept quiet in front of the other, recognizing my need for privacy. The 2 of them ate, but I couldn't bear to stomach anything. I was still reeling from that interaction. I completed my paperwork instead to keep my brain and hands busy. There were only 2 other incidents that night. Robert walked past the glass wall of our storefront. I managed to see him before he saw me, so I hid behind one of the hallways and busied myself with sorting flashcards, even though they were already in order. The colleague who knew what was going on more or less signaled once Robert was gone. The other one left as soon as her paperwork was done for the night. She had a kid to get back to, and then I was alone with my now boyfriend. He made a big show of helping me to lock up, and as we walked past Robert's car, which was now parked off to the side but closer to our store, my now boyfriend wrapped his arm around me and got into my car with me. We drove down and around the hill as I told him about what had happened in the sandwich shop. By the time we got back to the parking lot, Robert's car wasn't around. My colleague waited up until I got into my car and drove after me. We lived close to each other, only streets away, so it was a little bit like having a guardian angel that night. I worked at the tutoring place for another 3 years before leaving. In all that time, I never once did see Robert again, but I can't drive past that tract of land, no matter how different it looks now, without thinking about that awful, awful conversation. Sometimes I lie awake at night and wonder if everything about him is a lie. Is his name really Robert? Does he really have a music record label company? Or are these things he tells young girls to gain their confidence and really hurt them? So, fuck off, Robert. Also, I hope he isn't preying on young women anymore.